They didn't just sue me. They ambushed me while I was standing in uniform, thinking I was there to honor my father's legacy. I walked into that courtroom in Arlington, Virginia, wearing the dress blues I'd earned over 2 decades in counterintelligence. My ribbons in place, my badge polished. I was expecting a quiet estate hearing. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just closure. But the moment I stepped in, something felt wrong. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My sister, Savannah, sat with her husband, arms folded, faces stiff like porcelain. Their attorney was already on her feet. "Your Honor," she began, smooth and sharp like a scalpel. "We're submitting an emergency motion to challenge Miss Grayson's standing in this case, due to concerns about her mental fitness and abuse of authority." My brain couldn't catch up fast enough. Mental fitness? Abuse of authority? I hadn't said a word. And yet the narrative was already being rewritten, turning 2 decades of silent sacrifice into suspicion. I was being painted as unhinged, dangerous, a threat to my own family. Then came the list. Alleged coercion, manipulating an aging parent, intimidating presence due to her military background. I stared at them, not blinking, not breaking. Savannah's expression was rehearsed. My mother just looked tired. And I stood there, completely alone inside a courtroom meant for justice, now twisted into a stage for betrayal. What do you do when the people you protected turn around and call you the threat? What do you say when silence is used as proof of guilt? If you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, drop a single word in the comments. Enough. And still, I didn't speak. Because while they came to destroy my reputation, I came armed with something they never expected: the truth. And the truth doesn't need to shout. They say service changes you. That when you spend your life protecting something bigger than yourself, you learn to live without applause. That was true for me. My name is Elena Grayson. I served 22 years in U.S. counterintelligence, most of them behind screens, beneath encryption layers, chasing threats that didn't make headlines. No battlefield medals, no press conferences, just long nights, silent wins, and the satisfaction of knowing someone somewhere slept easier because of the work we did. I didn't grow up thinking I'd be a soldier. Honestly, I wanted to be a teacher. But life rarely follows plans drawn at 18. After college, a recruiter saw something in me, maybe the way I asked too many questions, maybe how I never backed down when things didn't add up. I enlisted. And I stayed. Through wars, cyber attacks, internal breaches, and everything in between. What people don't understand about that kind of work is, it isolates you. The more secrets you carry, the fewer people you can share them with. So, I learned to stay quiet. And when I came home between deployments, I never brought the job with me. I'd show up for Thanksgiving, I'd help with yard work. I'd sit on the porch with Dad and talk about absolutely nothing. That's how we stayed connected. Dad was old school. A union guy who worked in HVAC until his hands gave out. He didn't really get what I did, but he respected it. And in his own quiet way, he was proud. When he got sick, pancreatic cancer, stage 1, flew home as often as I could. I called doctors, managed bills, paid off the last of the mortgage without telling anyone. Not because I wanted credit, but because that house was his peace. I couldn't bear to see it lost to medical debt. Even after he passed, I kept up the quiet help. Mom wasn't working, and Savannah's husband had just launched yet another tech startup that needed a few family loans. I didn't ask for repayment. I didn't even bring it up. It was family. And family meant showing up heaven when no one clapped. But looking back, maybe that was my mistake. Because the more I gave without asking, the more invisible I became. When Dad died, I thought it would bring us closer. Grief does that sometimes. It strips away noise and leaves only what matters. But not this time. Savannah became distant. Mom started dodging my calls. I assumed it was sadness. Fatigue. I never imagined it was something else entirely. I spent my life guarding national security secrets, but somehow, I missed the one betrayal forming inside my own house. And the cruelest part? It wasn't just the money, it wasn't the house, or the assets, or even the lies they told in court. It was how easy it was for them to erase everything I had done for them, for Dad, for that legacy. Because when people decide you're no longer useful, they don't confront you. They rewrite the story. And you don't even get a line in it. But I hadn't come this far to disappear quietly. Not after everything. It started with an email. Nothing dramatic. No red flags. Just a subject line that felt wrong. Confirmation of Veteran Relief Deposit Vertical Bar Case ID. GRR 5217VX. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, barefoot, sipping coffee that had already gone cold. A Tuesday morning like any other. I remember the soft buzz of the fridge, the light tapping of tree branches against the window. One of those quiet days when your mind finally slows down, and then that line hit my inbox. At first, I assumed spam. Maybe a scam targeting former service members. But when I clicked, what I saw stopped me mid-sip. My full name, my military ID, my date of discharge, my last known deployment. All correct. All real. And listed beneath FEMA confirmation of a $47000 deposit made 2 days prior into a bank account I'd never seen before. A routing number tied to a financial institution I didn't use. With a balance that wasn't mine. My first instinct wasn't panic. It was that cold, precise silence, the one that comes just before something breaks. Because I knew what this was. Not an accident. Not a typo. A breach. But I didn't call the bank. I didn't forward the email. I made one call to Jeremy Cho, a contact from my last assignment at DHS. He owed me a favor. I cashed it in without hesitation. Run this for me, I said, forwarding the email. Full trace, off the record. By nightfall, he sent me the results. There it was buried in federal processing logs. A claim submitted on my behalf for veteran housing relief, processed using my ID and deployment status. The application was spotless, professional, documented with forms and timestamps that made it look legitimate. Except I hadn't submitted it, and I didn't need relief. Worse, the funds had been redirected through a secondary trustee account, the same one tied to the Grayson family estate. That's when my stomach dropped. I pulled up public property records, cross-referenced recent transactions, and right there, tucked into a legal filing from 5 weeks prior, I saw it. The deed to my parents' home, the one I helped pay off, had been transferred. Not to my mother. Not to Savannah. But to a corporate entity called Bright Trace Holdings, LLC. I knew that name. Savannah had mentioned it once over Thanksgiving. Some startup her husband was backing. Real estate tech, she'd said, waving a wine glass and laughing like it wasn't worth explaining. I hadn't asked questions. Now I wished I had. Because Bright Trace now legally owned the house I grew up in. The house I'd protected. The house I'd saved quietly, without ceremony. And my name? Gone. Nowhere on the records. Erased like I'd never existed there at all. I sat in the dark for a long time that night. No music. No lights. Just the dull blue glow of my screen and the sickening realization that someone had gotten inside. Not just into my finances. Into my life. They weren't just playing with money. They were rewriting the story, starting with the one place I thought was untouchable. And I wasn't about to let that happen. I didn't go there angry. I went there focused. I pulled up in front of my mother's house just after 8. The porch light was on. The same flickering bulb that had been dying since Thanksgiving. Someone had finally replaced it. The little things always get fixed when you're not around. I stood on the sidewalk for a few seconds, watching from a distance. Savannah's car was in the driveway. So was her husband's. That was fine. I wanted them both there. The folder in my hand held a printed copy of the deed, transfer black and white, no annotations. Just the raw fact of it, the Grayson family home, transferred to Bright Trace Holdings, signed by my mother, authorized by Savannah. I rang the doorbell once. Savannah opened it. She looked surprised, but not nervous. She had a glass of white wine in one hand, her phone in the other. Elena, she blinked. Did we have plans? I held up the paper. Number, we have problems. She stepped aside reluctantly. The house smelled like eucalyptus and candle wax. Inside, her husband Matt was half watching a true crime docuseries, the volume low. My mother sat in the corner recliner, flipping through a crossword, glasses down on her nose. I walked in without asking. This, I said, holding up the document, is the official transfer of Dad's house to a corporation run by your husband. Anyone want to explain? Matt barely looked up. That's just a restructuring. For tax purposes. Totally legal. My name's not on it. You don't live here anymore, he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. You helped? Yeah, past tense. I turned to my mother. Did you know about this? She hesitated. Savannah explained it, she murmured. It's for the family. For stability. I swallowed hard. Whose family? No one answered. Not Savannah, not Matt, not even my mother who now wouldn't look at me. The same woman I'd flown home for. Saturday with, through chemo appointments, paid bills for when no one else could. They all looked at me like I was a stranger in my own home. And in that moment, I realized. I was. I placed the paper gently on the coffee table, turned without another word, and walked toward the door. I passed the hallway mirror on my way out. For a second, I caught my reflection eyes hollow, jaw clenched, a single pulse ticking beneath the skin. This wasn't sadness. This was recognition. They didn't just cut me out of the house. They had erased me from the story. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the spare bedroom of my apartment, the one where no one else had ever stayed, and opened a fresh notebook. I didn't write about how I felt. I wrote names, dates, routing numbers, document IDs. I wasn't journaling. I was building a file. They thought I wouldn't do anything. They thought I'd stay quiet, like I always had. But they had no idea who they'd just locked out. The envelope was thick. Too thick for what it should have been. It showed up on a Thursday mid-morning, dropped unceremoniously through the mail slot like any other delivery. No knock. No doorbell. Just the sound of paper hitting the floor, followed by silence. I didn't rush to open it. I stared at it from across the kitchen, letting the weight of it settle before I even moved. Because deep down, I already knew. My name was printed on the front. Not Colonel. Not Elena Grayson. Just Elena, in block letters. Plain. Intentional. The return address in the upper left corner read, Rowan and Talbot, LLP, Family Law Division. I sat down before I opened it. Inside, Plaintiff, Savannah Claire Morrison. Défendant, Elena Marie Grayson. I read it twice. Then again. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. It wasn't just a letter, it was a message. They were suing me. For emotional distress. For undue influence over an elderly parent. For exploitation of military authority to gain financial control. They had taken everything I'd done for this family, every late-night flight home, every payment made in silence, every sacrifice they didn't even see, and twisted it into a weapon. A timeline unfolded on the next few pages, complete with distorted facts and surgical omissions. They claimed I had coerced our father into signing over financial control while he was medicated and confused. They said I used my intimidating presence and classified career to frighten my mother into silence. Savannah had even submitted screenshots of emails taken out of context conversations where I'd offered to help manage things, now painted as threats. And beneath it all, a request to have me removed from the estate entirely. No right to challenge. No right to claim. No right to speak. By noon, it had already hit the local news cycle. Decorated intelligence officer sued by family in inheritance dispute. Ex-military sister accused of intimidation, manipulation. They used that photo, the one where I'm mid-briefing, face hardened, voice raised. No context. Just optics. It was a story they could sell. That night, I turned off the television. But the noise didn't stop. It came in through texts from old colleagues, through quiet emails from people who weren't sure whether to ask or avoid. And then came the message I knew was coming from the Department of Homeland Security. Out of an abundance of caution, we recommend a temporary administrative leave. You're entitled to privacy. We'll handle press inquiries on your behalf. In other words, step back. Stay silent. Let the story run its course. But silence had already cost me too much. So I printed every page, scanned each exhibit, indexed them, not as evidence against me, but as a map of everything they'd done to keep me quiet. I wasn't going to win this through emotion. I'd win it through data. Because I knew something they didn't. While they were out there performing their betrayal in public, I was already pulling thread after thread behind the scenes. And, eventually, everything unravels. The first thing I learned in intelligence work is that people rarely hide things well. They just bury them deep enough to hope no one bothers to look. I bothered. After the lawsuit went public, I knew I had two choices: let them twist the narrative, or start pulling threads. And I had plenty to pull. I had names. I had dates. I had that strange email. The one with the fake veteran relief deposit. That was where I began. I started small. Public databases, tax records, business filings. It didn't take long to find the first thread. Brightrace Holdings, LLC. The company Savannah's husband, Matt, had casually mentioned over dinner 2 years ago, the one he said would revolutionize real estate data management. At the time, I thought it was just another buzzword startup. Something to nod politely at and forget. But Brightrace wasn't just some fledgling tech venture. It had been quietly acquiring property titles across the state under different shell names, many of which had connections to a single family trust. Our family trust. And the deeper I dug, the more I found. There were layered entities: Rivermark Financial, Easton Commons, Veripath Development, all tied back to Brightrace through directors, bank accounts, or oddly repetitive legal language in their articles of incorporation. They weren't hiding them. They were stacking them so that no one piece looked suspicious on its own. But together, it was a map. A network. And at the center of it all was money moving in circles. Transferring between accounts, bouncing off investment firms, routed into what looked like charitable donations. I traced one major withdrawal, $68000 from our father's trust. It was sent to an organization I'd never heard of, Valor Path Wellness Foundation. I checked their site. It looked polished. Generic. Therapy services for veterans, trauma, support, mental health outreach. All the right words. All the right colors. And listed as founder and executive director? Savannah Morrison. That was the moment the pieces stopped feeling like coincidence. I kept digging. The Valor Path Foundation had received multiple grants over the past year, all underwritten using verification codes tied to my service record. My deployments, my ID, my credentials. They hadn't just stolen money. They were using me as the cover. It got worse. Several of the listed beneficiaries of the program veterans supposedly receiving care were either people I knew personally or people who were dead. One name stopped me cold. Caleb Vance. He was in my unit. Killed in 2011 during a convoy attack in Kandahar. According to Valor Path's ledger, Caleb had been receiving therapy sessions as recently as 6 months ago. That's when the cold finally reached my core. This wasn't disorganized greed. It wasn't a few bad choices. It was calculated. It was targeted. And it was built on the backs of the people I had spent my life protecting. They thought burying it under paperwork and polite press releases would be enough. That no one would notice. But I noticed. And I wasn't going to be silent anymore. At first, I thought it was just about money. I mean, what else could it be? Fraud. Theft. Greed dressed up as philanthropy. That would have been bad enough. But I'd been in this business long enough to know when something feels too clean, too deliberate, it usually is. The data trail wasn't random. Every transfer had a purpose. Every shell company was positioned like a chess piece. They weren't just shuffling money, they were hiding something else. I went back through the Valor Path transactions, line by line. That's when I saw it. Line item 428. Consulting fees. Paid to Lyrics Innovations AG. Address: Zurich, Switzerland. Payment memo: infrastructure expansion support. I froze. Lyrics wasn't just some foreign vendor. It was a flagged entity blacklisted by U.S. cyber threat operations 3 years ago for suspected links to international espionage groups. I remembered the name from a closed-door briefing. At the time, the evidence wasn't enough to indict, but enough to watch. And now that name was sitting in my family's accounting trail. I stared at the screen, heart thudding slow and deep. I opened the contract attached to the payment. Encrypted, but not well. Inside, vague language about data provisioning, credential segmentation, cloud elevation keys. I'd seen enough sanitized language to know what it meant. They weren't just stealing veteran identities. They were using military-grade access points. My clearances. My credentials. My name as a front door. I leaned back in my chair. My fingers trembled not from fear, but from the kind of adrenaline that hits when a puzzle locks into place. When the story you don't want to believe becomes the only one that makes sense. This wasn't just about Savannah or Matt anymore. Someone had seen opportunity, and they'd used the one thing I never thought anyone could turn against Mimi Service. A few days later, I found the file that confirmed everything. It was an internal memo sent by Savannah to a partner consultant overseas. Most of it was scrubbed metadata, but one line stuck out buried in the body of the message. Package confirmed. Clearance routes stable, awaiting final extraction. Package. Clearance. Extraction. Those words don't belong in nonprofit admin talk. They belong in Black Ops briefings. I closed my laptop and stared into the dark for a long time, not thinking, just breathing, trying to remind myself who I was, what I'd trained for, but the truth was already burned into my spine. They weren't just laundering stolen money. They were creating access tunnels away into systems that were never meant to be touched. And they were doing it through me. I had become their camouflage. My military record. My security history. My trustworthiness on paper. It was never about the inheritance. It was never even about the house. It was about entry. What's worse, being betrayed by a stranger, or used by the people who know exactly where you're vulnerable? Tell me in the comments. Because when someone uses your honor as a mask for their crime, that's not betrayal. That's war. And I wasn't going to fight it with silence. Silence can feel like surrender. But sometimes, it's just preparation. After that email, after the words, clearance route stable, I stopped talking. Not out of fear, not even rage. I just shut everything down. Locked every device, every account, every traceable line. And I waited. Not for them. For me. Because I knew exactly what had to happen next. And I couldn't do it alone. The first person I contacted was Miles Brennan, former Army intel, now working off-grid doing threat analysis for hire. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, but trust doesn't expire the way time does. The message was short. Need you. Secure. No digital trace. He responded with a single emoji. A compass. That meant yes. The second was Anna Levins, cyber forensics. Brilliant, meticulous, and borderline paranoid in all the right ways. She used to track digital supply chain compromises for government contractors. She owed me nothing but respected me enough to listen. We met in a borrowed cabin 3 hours outside DC. No cell signals. No Wi-Fi. Just a wood stove, blackout curtains, and a folding table that turned into our war room. I laid it all out. Not the emotion, just the evidence. The shell companies. The funding flows. The dead veterans. The data points leading to Zurich. And finally, the memo. Anna didn't blink. Miles didn't say a word. They just started scanning files and connecting dots, like they'd been waiting for this kind of mess. We worked in shifts. One slept, one mapped, one verified. No hierarchy, no ranks, just purpose. By day 3, we had a full timeline. Every transaction, every login, every fake record linked to Valor Path and routed through Bright Trace. Each entry brought us closer to the thing no one wanted to say out loud. This wasn't a one-off scam. It was a structure, built to be scalable, built to hide state-level breaches behind a charity logo and a grieving widow's smile. The night it hit me hardest, I couldn't sleep. I sat near the cabin window, the air outside brittle and cold. Trees stood like shadows, unmoving. I thought about my dad. How he never understood the work I did, but always respected the silence. How he'd sit in his chair and say, just because they don't clap doesn't mean it didn't matter. That's what this was now. Not revenge. Not even justice. Just mattering. Doing the thing no one else could. Because no one else knew what to look for. In the quiet hum of data processing and firewood crackling, I found my clarity. This wouldn't be a confrontation. This would be a correction. They thought I would walk away quietly. That I'd stay in the shadows. But I don't walk into fights empty-handed. I never have. They underestimated the soldier. And they forgot the analyst. They wanted to erase me from the story. Instead, I was writing the part where they lose control. I didn't wear the uniform to make a statement. I wore it because it was mine. Pressed, clean, deliberate, every ribbon in place, every inch earned. Not borrowed. Not gifted. Not symbolic. Real. The courthouse in Fairfax was quiet that morning. The kind of quiet that hums just beneath polished tile and fluorescent light. People don't speak louder than they have to in federal buildings. They look down. They move fast. I moved slow. Inside the courtroom, Savannah sat at the plaintiff's table in a gray blazer and carefully neutral makeup. Matt was beside her, tapping his foot in nervous loops. Their attorney, a woman in a tailored navy suit, shuffled papers like she already knew how this would go. Across the aisle, I took my seat. No one looked at me. My mother sat 3 rows behind them. Her hands folded tightly in her lap, face unreadable. I didn't expect a smile. But I didn't expect indifference, either. The judge entered. We stood. The formality of it all landed with a kind of weight I hadn't felt in years. Protocol with consequences. Their lawyer started strong. She painted me as detached. Isolated. Cold due to prolonged exposure to combat environments. She cited mental health statistics, cherry-picked articles, even referenced my declassified missions, each one repackaged as proof of instability. Miss Grayson is not violent, she said with a smile. But her presence is intimidating. Her rank gives her undue influence, and that influence has been used to manipulate assets, family trust funds, and vulnerable individuals under emotional duress. They had rehearsed this. Savannah took the stand. Her voice was gentle, measured, just enough tremble. She's always been distant, she said. Even as kids. She doesn't understand people. She understands control, and we were scared. Scared. Of me. She looked straight ahead as she said it. Not at me, never at me. When the judge asked if I had anything to submit, I stood slowly. I didn't address Savannah. I didn't explain myself. I didn't defend my personality or my military service. Instead, I walked to the bench, opened my case, and withdrew a single folder. One document. I handed it to the clerk. Your Honor, I said calmly. This is my only submission. He adjusted his glasses. Read the first line. Paused. Read the second. By the fourth, he looked up sharply. Close the doors, he said. His voice low, steady, final. No one leaves. The courtroom shifted. Air tightened. The bailiff moved toward the rear exit. Locks clicked. Metsad bolt upright. Savannah froze. I didn't move. Because I already knew what came next. And I had waited a long, long time for this moment. The doors shut behind us with a heavy, unmistakable click. What followed was silence, but not the peaceful kind. The kind that signals the room has changed. The kind that says, someone knows something now. The judge turned to the bailiff. Bring them in. Savannah shifted in her seat. Matt whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the judge's face, watching for any clue of what was coming. There wasn't one. 3 seconds later, the courtroom doors opened again. This time, it wasn't another clerk or late-arriving attorney. It was federal agents. Badges out, suits sharp, movements quiet and precise. They walked straight to the plaintiff's table. No hesitation. No ceremony. Savannah Morrison, Matthew Morrison, you're under federal investigation for fraud, identity exploitation, and violation of national data security laws. Savannah didn't move. Matt looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. He opened his mouth, but the agent cut him off. You'll have a chance to speak. Not here. The cuffs were quick. Not harsh. Not dramatic. Just real. You could hear metal against bone, a sound that's never loud but always final. The courtroom didn't erupt. There were no gasps or outbursts. Just stillness. The kind that only happens when truth hits hard enough to stop everything else. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I didn't turn around to look at my mother, who was now covering her mouth with both hands, eyes wide in disbelief. I just watched as Savannah, me sister, my blood was led past me in cuffs. She didn't cry. She looked at me. And, in a voice barely audible, she whispered, "We didn't mean for it to go this far." But she had. They all had. And I wasn't going to make their excuses for them. Matt was let out next. Head down. Silent. The judge cleared his throat and looked at me. "Miss Grayson," he said, "the evidence you submitted warrants immediate protection for the parties affected. We will coordinate with Homeland Security to initiate data privacy restoration and offer relief to impacted veterans." End of 2. I nodded once. It was the only response I could manage. I'd spent months preparing for this. Sleepless nights, mapping accounts, chasing paper trails, decrypting lies, stacked on lies. I had seen it coming, piece by piece. And still, nothing prepares you for the moment when it actually collapses. The people who erased me were now the ones being removed. From the courtroom. From the story. As the agents left with Savannah and Matt, the room remained quiet. No one applauded. No one said my name. But they all looked at me now. Not with pity. Not with fear. But with something else. Recognition. Not for what I wore. Not for the medals. But for what I did. And somewhere inside that silence, I finally heard something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Control. And the beginning of peace. There was no press conference. No headlines screaming justice. No photos of me holding a victory statement outside the courthouse. I didn't want that, and it wouldn't have meant anything. Because this wasn't a win. Not in the way people usually define it. After the hearing, I didn't go out to celebrate. I went home. I made tea. I stood at my kitchen window while it steeped. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I let myself feel still. The silence didn't feel sharp anymore. It didn't echo with accusation. It felt earned. 2 days later, I did what I'd been thinking about since the moment I saw Caleb Vance's name misused in that fraudulent ledger. I filed paperwork for a nonprofit. Clear Code Valor. A foundation for veterans whose identities had been compromised for those exploited by the very systems meant to support them. No fanfare, no launch event. Just a clear mission and a folder of encrypted files that would never see the light of day, but would guide every policy we wrote. The logo was simple. A dark shield with a single, unbroken thread across the center. The message was quiet, but firm. We don't unravel. I didn't expect responses right away. But within a week, the first letter came. Handwritten. From a woman in Nebraska. Her husband had served in Iraq, killed in action in 2008. His name had been used twice through one of Savannah's shell accounts. She found out after applying for federal survivor benefits and being flagged for fraud. The letter was short. No dramatics. Just this line. We thought no one would fight for us. Then you did. I read it 3 times. Then folded it carefully and placed it in a file labeled, "Keep Going." Because that was all I needed. The strange thing about rebuilding is, no one tells you how quiet it is. There's no soundtrack. No speeches. Just small decisions: what to save, what to throw out, what to protect next time. My apartment is still the same. Spare. Efficient. Quiet. But the quiet doesn't sting anymore. It holds space now. For peace. For clarity. For what matters. I didn't call my mother. I didn't write to Savannah. Some things remain broken for a reason. But I started hearing from old colleagues again. People I hadn't spoken to in years. Some said thank you. Others didn't say anything at all, just sent contacts, support, quiet affirmations that said, "We see what you did." And that was enough. Because I didn't rebuild to be seen. I rebuilt to protect. To restore. And maybe, just maybe, to become the version of myself that didn't need anyone's permission to belong. This wasn't about getting back what I lost. It was about deciding what comes next. I used to think justice looked like noise. Big gestures. Loud truth. Doors slamming shut and people finally seeing what you've always known. But that's not how it happens, not really. Justice, when it comes, is quiet. It doesn't rush. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives with weight, not volume. And when it settles, it changes everything. Months have passed since the hearing. The media cycle moved on, just like it always does. A new scandal. A new fall from grace, and I let it. Because this story, my story, was never about spectacle. It was about reclaiming the one thing I almost forgot I had. Agency. They tried to strip me down to a headline, a caricature, the cold sister, the disconnected veteran, the woman in the room nobody understood. But the truth is, I never needed them to understand. What I needed was to stop waiting for permission to protect what mattered. That's the part no one tells you. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't fighting for justice. It's believing you deserve to. It took me years to realize that silence isn't always strength, and it's not always survival. Sometimes, silence is what the people who hurt you count on most. And when I finally broke that silence, when I said, enough, it wasn't just for me. It was for every veteran who's been reduced to paperwork. For every daughter written out of the family story. For every quiet person told their pain wasn't loud enough to count. There's this moment I keep coming back to. It's not the courtroom. Not the confrontation. Not even the arrest. It's a memory. From years ago. Dad and I, sitting on the porch, drinking bad coffee from chipped mugs. He looked out at nothing in particular and said, "You don't need to be the loudest one in the room, kid. You just need to be the last one standing." And now, I finally understand what he meant. You don't win by shouting. You win by enduring. By knowing who you are when everything else falls away. If you've ever stayed silent to keep the peace only to lose yourself in the process, this is your sign to speak. Share your story. You never know who it might free. Because here's the lesson. Family isn't always the people who raised you. It's not always blood. Sometimes, it's the people who show up when everything is falling apart. And the version of yourself you discover when you finally stop shrinking to make others comfortable. The war I fought wasn't about inheritance or revenge. It was about memory. About reclaiming a name they tried to rewrite. And walking out of the wreckage not bitter, but whole. Not quiet because I was silenced. But quiet because I finally didn't need to explain myself anymore. And, in that stillness, I found something stronger than anger. Stronger than grief. Stronger than even justice. I found peace. Because this time, I made it myself.